Yeah, thank you, Emily. Of course, an impossible act to follow. I almost feel like we should just leave it here and we're all feeling energized and ready to go and just go out and do it. But I guess we have an evening plan, so we'll continue with that. And I'm going to go back to where I was. I, of course, love Representative Presley talking about this is how we need to pay for things. All right, are you seeing my slides? Yes, okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm here to talk about the Pentagon budget, and of course this is hosted by Massachusetts Peace Action, so a lot of you probably are going to be familiar with some of what I'm going to say, or a lot of what
other groups, not just Mass Peace Action. Sorry.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay. A lot of you here are I know I see some familiar names and faces affiliated with Mass Peace Action, but hopefully there will be some new material for everybody. And of course, the first thing I want to say is just that the Pentagon budget, of course, represents our wars in other places. It represents our use of violence as a solution, and it represents suffering for people all around the world. But it also represents a failure to recognize the real solutions to our most serious problems. And part of building back better, if that's what we want to do, needs to be to spend less on the Pentagon and less on militarization and more on human needs. So we are doing okay with the second part of that. We're beginning to spend more on human needs, although as Debbie talked about, there's a lot more that we need to do. But unfortunately, last Friday, the Biden administration released their budget request, and it included an increase for the Pentagon. This is a pattern that we're quite used to over the last 4 years. We've seen it every year, but we hoped for something better this year. So just to sort of revisit the past very briefly, this was the Trump budget request last year. And so we're just, for folks who may not be familiar with the entire process, the presidential budget request is not the budget. So this didn't become a reality, but this is what the president proposed last year. And this is just a very simple, it shows a pie chart of discretionary spending, which is the portion of the federal budget that doesn't include things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, but it's the majority of everything else. So everything from housing to public education is all in this part of the budget. And as you can see, last year, at just about this time, a little earlier, President Trump proposed that that budget should be 55% military and only 45% everything else. Now, this is where we actually ended up for this is actually fiscal year 2020, but it hasn't changed dramatically. So we've ended up at about 53% military, and that is where the United States has been stuck for a very long time, at just over 50% of the discretionary budget going to the military. And just to show you what else that includes, instead of just non-military, this chart has all of the other things. So you see housing and veterans benefits and healthcare, not including Medicare and Medicaid, education, the energy and the environment, the CDC is in here. So everything else combined is less than the Pentagon budget. Now, just to add to that a little bit, we look at the military budget. That's the Pentagon and nuclear weapons, which are part of the Department of Energy, actually, but very much part of the military. But we also look at what portion of the rest of the federal budget goes toward militarized government. And so if you include things like the Department of Homeland Security, Immigrations and Customs, and which is ICE, and federal grants for policing, federal prisons, all of these things, you get another 10% of the federal budget that goes to militarized purposes. So all told, it's almost 2/3 of the discretionary budget that Congress allocates every year that goes to militarization. Now, finally, here's the Biden request. This came out just last Friday, and it has something different. So I'm going to start with the good before I get to the bad. The good is that for the first time in memory, it would call for less than 50% of the federal budget to go toward the military. Now it's just barely under 50%, but still, that's a shift that we haven't seen for some time, and it's something that we've talked about for quite a while, about how we have more than half of this discretionary budget that goes to the Pentagon. So at the outset, we know that the Biden budget would put slightly, ever so slightly more than half of the resources into all of those other things. Now, here are the specific ways that the Biden proposal, and again, it's just a proposal, it's not the budget, and the final budget won't look like this. But here are the specific ways that it differs from the budget that is current law that we have now. It calls for big increases in education, big increases in health and human services, but the third largest category of increase is still for the military. And I'll note that in this particular chart, we're just talking about the Department of Defense. So there's actually more military in the Department of Energy and other places that isn't reflected here because of the way that the Biden budget put the numbers out. But so you can see that the increase for the military is $11.3 billion over the value of last year. And I'll just compare that to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the right. That gold bar for the Department of State and International Aid is an increase of $6.8 billion. So they're giving a bigger increase to the Pentagon than they're giving to diplomacy and foreign aid. Now, that is a ratio of, for every $1 billion the State Department gets, the Pentagon would get $11.8 billion. And this is from an administration that is talking a good game about returning to democracy, to diplomacy, returning the United States to its position of leadership around the world. But this is still the picture. So Debbie talked a bit about the American Jobs Plan and the American Rescue Plan, which came before it. The American Jobs Plan has shown up in the media a lot as a $2 trillion plan. It's actually about $2.3 trillion. And that works out to about $280 billion a year because the plan would be spread over 8 years. So at $280 billion a year, the Pentagon request under the Biden budget is more than 2.5 times the annual spending proposed under the American Jobs Plan. And the last time the Pentagon budget was lower than $280 billion a year was in 1951. So we are spending every year several American Jobs Plans on the Pentagon. And we've been doing that since, probably a lot of people on this call, since, you know, before you were born or when you were very small children. And then another way of looking at it, so this is the proposed Pentagon increase on the left, and this does include nuclear weapons, so it's a slightly different number from what you saw before, but it's still the same concept. The proposed increase for the Pentagon in the Biden budget is $12.3 billion, and the entire proposed budget for the CDC is $8.7 billion. So they're proposing a bigger increase for the Pentagon than the entire budget of the CDC. And this is just a perfect example of how we're putting our resources into the wrong places to address the problems that we're really facing. I don't need to tell you what the pandemic has cost us all in terms of, you know, dollars and opportunities and experiences lost and lives lost. So this is a really tragic chart. So where does all of the Pentagon money go? For one thing, it goes to the 800 plus military installations that the United States has all around the world. Many of these, you'll see the biggest ones in Italy, Japan, Korea. Many of those are in places where the United States fought 20th century wars. And we are still there. We have never left. So this is particularly, to me, poignant this week as we talk about finally leaving Afghanistan, to realize that we have been in these other places since we got there in World War II, and we've never left. And so this is a major opportunity for the United States to pull back. And I'll just also note that while the United States has 800 military installations around the world, no other country has more than 20. Now, this is probably familiar, especially to folks who follow mass peace action, but the United States military budget is greater than the next 10 countries combined. And both of those on their own are greater than the entire rest of the world, which is 139 countries. So our military budget is massive. No other country comes close. And in particular, I'll point out China there in the middle in the red doesn't come anywhere close to our military spending. And yet they're becoming one of the primary justifications for increased military spending by the United States today. Now, here's another place where the dollars go. So this is the 2019 Department of Defense budget. It's actually probably gotten a little bit worse since then, but in 2019, 57% of the budget of the Department of Defense went to contractors, and only 43% stayed in the Department of Defense, and only a little over 20% went to the troops for pay and benefits. So the contractors are a key piece of this. And finally, there's a study that shows that this is related to all those bases I showed earlier, but also to United States naval presence and so many other things. The US spends an estimated at least $81 billion a year to protect global oil supplies, obviously making climate change much worse and adding on to the fact that the Pentagon is already one of the world's largest institutional fossil fuel emitters and emits more fossil fuels than many countries. Okay, so how do we get out of this? So this is a chart that shows the annual federal budget process. This is the process for discretionary spending. And what I really want to call your attention to is in the top right, at the very beginning of the flow chart, it goes from top to middle to bottom is the president's budget. So we're right at the beginning of this process, and we still have opportunities to change it this year. There are two major pieces of legislation that set the Pentagon budget. There's the National Defense Authorization Act and the Defense Appropriations process, and both of them provide opportunities to cut spending and change military policy. Now this year, I'm talking very short term now, because longer term we want to make many more cuts than this. But in the short term, in the next couple of years, the things that we want to focus on are to stop funding wars, to scale back nuclear weapons, and to say no to the contractors. So first, wars. And this week is really big because the US has decided to leave Afghanistan. So this, you would think, should provide some savings, right? Even the administration is talking about the fact that we've spent blood and treasure and talking about how we need these resources for the American Jobs Plan and for other things. And yet, this is coming right on the heels of the budget that increases Pentagon spending. So they're clearly taking whatever savings come from pulling troops out of Afghanistan and putting it back into the military plus more. Now, this is a chart of the war on terror. These are all the countries where we have military bases that are engaged in the war on terror, counterterrorism training going on, We have military training. We have troops in combat in 14 countries. I challenge most of the people on this call to be able to name all of them. And we have drones and airstrikes in 7 countries. This chart is a couple of years old, but I'll just have you notice that it's way beyond the Middle East. We have tons of counterterrorism activity in Africa, in Asia, and it's really all over the world. So even while we're pulling out of Afghanistan, the war on terror is still raging. And finally, the China threat, which is being majorly inflated. I wouldn't even really categorize it as a threat, certainly not as a military threat to the United States. But it's forming the whole new basis for increased Pentagon spending. And next is nuclear weapons. Earlier this year, many of us celebrated when the UN treaty banning nuclear weapons went into effect. The US is not a signatory, but this is what we need to be working towards. In the shorter term, we need to stop the plans to develop new intercontinental ballistic missiles. Specifically, there's a program called the Ground-Based Strategic Deterrent that we can stop before it starts, which is a really important opportunity. There are a lot of these programs that have been going for long enough that they've got a lot of momentum. This is one where we still have an opportunity to stop it early on. And the contractors. So this is just the latest in a long series of debacles for the F-35 fighter jet, and probably my favorite, rivaled only by the time one of them caught fire just sitting on a runway. The F-35 a couple of weeks ago, this jet that's supposed to be the new big thing for the Pentagon, managed to shoot itself somehow. Like the same jet literally shot itself. It's hard to fathom, but it happened. So there are we don't need these things is the point. These are not for our security. They don't even work. And this is an ad that Lockheed Martin, the company responsible for the F-35, ran in some newspaper. And you'll know that they talked about security, which is of course the reason we're supposed to be doing this, but they also talk about jobs. And the problem with that is that investing in the military creates fewer jobs than investing the same dollars in almost anything else, including clean energy, infrastructure, healthcare, or education. All of those for the same investment create more good jobs than investing in the military and war. So where does all of that leave us? It leaves us at a place where the Biden administration put forth a budget proposal that is a real disappointment, does not live up to the standards that they're setting for themselves on domestic policy, where they're moving in a more progressive direction. That's not what's happening here. But we're making progress in Congress. We have 50 House Democrats who sent a letter to President Biden urging him to significantly slash the defense budget. We have, from last year, when there was a vote on a 10% cut on Pentagon spending, the support of not quite half, but getting close to half of the House Democrats, plus about close to half of the Senate Democrats, plus the support of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, which it was a bit of a surprise and something that we hope that other senators will follow in his lead when we put forth similar cuts this year, which we will be doing. And so finally, just because we're talking about the full range of budget and all of the things that Debbie talked about in terms of human needs and what the American Rescue Plan does and what the American Jobs Plan does. So the 10% cut that we're calling for in the Pentagon budget could return to Massachusetts taxpayers $2.4 billion. Wow. And that amount of money could pay for 54,000 $15 an hour jobs with benefits, or 48,000 4-year full scholarships to a state university, or solar utility power for almost 6 million households. So there's so many better uses for that money and things that would really address our security. And I know I've run long, so this is my last slide. And if you want to come up with more things that our money could do for us by disinvesting in the Pentagon and investing in human needs, you can do that. We have a calculator at www.nationalpriorities.org. And I saw there are folks from some other states besides Massachusetts, which is great in this age of Zoom. And you can change it to your own state. So this one's showing New Mexico, but we have all of them. Thank you so much. I know I've run over time, so I will stop.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Definitely not the most uplifting, but extremely informative. I love the National Priorities Project website. It's so useful, and using it to calculate those trade-offs. As someone in New York, we were shocked and pleasantly surprised when Schumer supported the 10% cut. We really didn't think we would see the day, but hopefully he'll continue to do that, and we can push everyone all over to do the same.